Hey guys, it's Cece, and today I am here to talk about the things that I read in November and what I plan to read in December. So this month I'm doing things a little differently. I'm combining my wrap-up and my TBR. This is for two reasons. Number one, I didn't read a ton in November, so there's not a lot to cover. And number two, we're already like halfway through December. So I figured it was going to be easiest to just put this all in one video. So the beginning of this video is going to be about the 6 things that I read in November, one of which was a reread, and then the other bit of this video is going to be the few books that I'm tentatively planning on reading before the end of the year. And with that out of the way, let's just go ahead and jump in and get started. For this November wrap-up, I'm not going to do things in order of how much I enjoyed them because I just don't feel like my ratings and my reading month really match up to that metric that I usually use for a wrap-up at the end of the month. So I'm going to talk about my reread just super quickly, and then we're going to go through the other books in the order that I read them in November. So the quick reread mention, I reread Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. I honestly just needed a pick-me-up at the beginning of the month, and honestly, considering some stuff that happened at the end of November for me, I'm really glad that I got to read a bit of very uplifting fiction earlier in the month. I think that it was a sign. I knew what I needed at that time, and I'm really glad that I had this positivity, like, freshly in my mind, because at the end of November I had to deal with a really significant loss in my family. I also reread this book because I went to Casey McQuiston's event. She was here in Seattle at, like, in the midpoint of November. So this copy actually was technically already signed because I had a signed book plate, but I met Casey and she signed it. It says history, huh? Which makes me emotional. I went to this event with an incredible fellow booktuber. I am going to go ahead and link Anna's channel down in the description below. You should go and check them out. They were recently one of the co-hosts for the Queer Lit Readathon, which is super cool, and honestly I just think that you should watch Anna's channel. It was really, really awesome to reread this book. I loved it just as much the second time. Still gave it 5 stars, still one of my favorite books ever. If you don't know what Red, White, and Royal Blue is about, it is about the first son of America falling for a prince of England, and it is the rom-com of my dreams, basically. So, 5 out of 5 stars. These other 5 books that I read in the month of November were all part of my IndigAthon reading plans. IndigAthon was a month-long readathon hosted by Brody and Michelle, and it was all about reading books by Native authors, which I did. All 5 of these books are by Native authors and focus on Indigenous stories, so let's talk about these in the order in which I read them. So the first book that I finished in November was Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. This was technically I completed it in November. I think I read about the first 75 pages in May of this year, and I just had to set it aside for a while and then come back to it. Honestly, I think that me setting it aside was kind of a sign that I wasn't totally vibing with this. This is like a paranormal fantasy, a post-apocalyptic book. It's set after a climate apocalypse basically devastates the Earth. And one of the only places that was saved is this former Navajo reservation, so it's all set on this reservation, and as the waters rose, so did the heroes of Navajo legend, and so did the monsters of Navajo legend. So this is about a girl named Maggie, and she is a monster hunter. She has, like, supernatural enhanced abilities to hunt monsters. And at the beginning of this book, she kills a monster that is unlike any other monster, and it kind of spawns this mystery that she sets out to solve just herself and this kind of mysterious medicine man that she meets named Kai. For me, this was a 3-star read. It just, I don't know. So the first half of this book was interesting. I really loved the amount of world building that was done. There was so much to build into this story. The monsters, the post-apocalypse, like what life looks like now. There were gods, there are monster hunters, like there's so much packed in here with the world building. And I think that was all done so fantastically. Like that is what kept me reading, was knowing more about this world. First half of this was really rough when it came to writing. honestly, it just felt very cookie cutter. And beyond cookie cutter, it felt repetitive. We kept hearing the exact same comments about the characters over and over again to emphasize them. Like, Maggie is a loner, Maggie doesn't trust people, Kai is mysterious, Kai is hiding something, and we just kept hearing those things over and over again. And I think the second half kind of made up for that by having a really engaging conclusion. There was a lot going on, and I think that was done fairly well, but I still think those kind of cookie cutter revelations kept happening. Maybe it's just a thing with me and, like, paranormal fantasy. Sometimes I don't totally vibe with it. I thought this was a great piece of world-building fantasy. I just don't think it was as engaging to me when it came to the writing style. Just me and the writing style didn't vibe. I wound up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. This is the first book in a series, The Sixth World. I'm probably not going to be continuing on with the series, but if you're a fan of, like, Monster Hunter stories, paranormal fantasy, I would recommend this. It just seems like this was more of a me issue. Next, I read a novella, Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones. I got this out of the library, as I got many of these books out of the library, and someone reserved it, so I had to return it. I no longer have this novella. This is a horror novella about grief and loss. It's about I think he's about 12. He's a young boy dealing with the loss of his father, and it's just him and his little brother and his mother, and then one night he thinks he sees the ghost of his father in full regalia. And so he's kind of chasing after the ghost of his father as he's dealing with grief. And this was really interesting. This is one of those novellas where there were a lot of times where I wasn't fully sure what was happening, so I think that I would do better with this on a reread. It happens every now and then that a book is going for really intense imagery, and sometimes I get a little lost in that. I think that happened at just a couple points in this book that made me a little confused, but I did think it was a really fascinating novella about grief and about a young boy coming into his own after losing his father, a young boy protecting his younger brother from the ghost of his father. It was definitely a little spooky in some places. I don't know if it was necessarily, like, bone-chilling, but it is very much about ghosts and about the looming threat of death. And I just thought that this was handling some really ambitious ideas that I was really interested in. And even if this wasn't, like, a perfect book for me, I really still enjoyed it. I give it 3.5 out of 5 stars, almost a 4-star read, but I am definitely interested in reading Stephen Graham Jones' other work. Like, 100%, this got me invested. I know that there's a lot more out there. I know that Stephen has a new book coming out in 2020, and I am 100% trying to track down a copy of that book so I can read it early, because this overall just got me invested in Stephen Graham Jones' writing. That's what I took away from it. I recommend it. I thought it was a really interesting read. Next, I read There by Tommy Orange. This is a super acclaimed literary novel. It has, I believe, 12 perspectives, and it's about all of these people and their overlapping, intertwining lives leading up to the big Oakland powwow. So some of these people are related, some of them are related and don't know it, some of them just have stories that are interconnecting for other reasons, and it is all just leading up to this big powwow at the end of the book and everyone clashing and what happens there. I thought this was really fascinating in some moments. I think I liked the first 2/3 more than the last third. The conclusion of the book really wasn't my jam at all. I had a really hard time with it, but the first 2/3 were really fascinating as you get to know all 12 characters. I am a big fan of novels that have a large cast of characters with all of these different points of view that all overlap at different moments. I just am really interested in that style of storytelling, and I think this did that particularly well. I also loved the bits of history that were wound through this book. There was an introduction and an interlude that just went over some native history that was really fascinating, and there were some big events that happened in these characters' lives that I knew a bit about, but then I would go and read more about. Like, one of these characters, Jackie, was with her mother and her sister during the native occupation of Alcatraz. which is a super interesting event. If you don't know about it, I would encourage you to go read more. I initially heard about it in an episode of Drunk History, but then did more research after that, and then reading this book, I was really glad that I'd been introduced to that bit of history because I had no idea. So first 2/3 of this I thought were really fascinating. I really struggled with the end, so I wound up giving this like a 3.5, maybe a 4-star. I will say one of my favorite things about this book is that there is a full character list in the front that, like, introduces every character and what's going on with their stories, and I really appreciated that. I needed it while I was reading it. This is super ambitious, there's a lot going on, so if you do read this book, I would highly encourage you to utilize that character list at the front. You're probably gonna need it. So yeah, those are my thoughts on there. I liked it. I really did like it. An ending for me can really make or break a novel, and I think that this ending just didn't work for me, and so it made this a less enjoyable read overall, even though I liked more than half of the book and was really interested in what it was doing. Just that ending, it just isn't for me. Next, I have my absolute favorite thing that I read in the month of November, and that is The Break by Katherena Vermette. This was actually the group read for IndigAthon. If you want to know more about IndigAthon, everything will be linked down in the description below, by the way. So this was the group read. I got it out from the library. There's even a library sticker on it. I am so glad that I did. I really want my own copy of this book now. This is about a community of Native women. It's very intergenerational. It's about this community of women. Most of them are related in some way to one another. Not just their stories, like all of their stories are obviously related, but it's about a family. It's an intergenerational family story. It begins with one night a young woman witnesses what she believes is a rape. And it is about a community of women reacting to whatever this terrible event was that occurred. This is another one of those ambitious literary novels where you have a lot of different family members, and again, I occasionally relied on the family chart that was in the front. There's a whole family tree, and I found myself flipping to that a lot when I was reading the introduction of this book, just so I could keep track of who everybody was. But this was such a fascinating book. This had so much heart, and I loved reading about all of these different women at different points in their lives, coming together, the different moments they had clashed, the ways that families come together in a crisis. I did have some issues with some of the fat phobia in this book. I also had some issues with the fat phobia in There, if I'm being totally honest with you. This book just, whenever there was a character who was fat, it was pointed out as a negative. They were constantly over-described, and I had a really hard time with that. I didn't really think that was necessary at all, but I did find the story absolutely fascinating. I loved these women, and there's one male narrator who I really loved as well. I wound up giving this book a strong 4 stars. I highly recommend it. I'm definitely looking into getting myself a copy. I thought it was fascinating. And the last book that I'm going to talk about, I am not going to give a rating for. I just don't feel like I can give a rating for this book, but I really still wanted to talk about it. That book is Not Your Princess, Voices of Native American Women, edited by Lisa Charleyboy and Mary Beth Leatherdale. This is a pretty short collection, but there's a lot in here. There are like a ton of different very short entries. And this is a collection basically mapping out what it means to be a Native woman today. There's a lot of art, there's a lot of poetry, there are a couple pieces of very short fiction, there are a couple of stories, and all of these come from women at different points in their lives, in different age groups. So this paints a huge picture of the wide variety of creative minds that are writing, that are creating in Native communities. This was my patron chosen book for November. I'm really glad that they chose this book to read. I hope that other people pick this book up so that they can learn more. Like I said, I just feel weird about giving this a rating because there are so many different pieces of work here that I feel like I can't boil it down to one rating. I just overwhelmingly felt like this was a necessary thing to read if you want just a small picture of what it means to be an Indigenous woman creating today. So yeah, those are my thoughts about Not Your Princess. I recommend it. I'm really glad that my patrons chose this for me to read, and I hope more people pick it up. because I thought it was fascinating. So those are the 6 books that I read in the month of November. November was kind of an up and down month for reading. I was reading really slowly, and then, like I said, the end of November was incredibly difficult for me. If you follow me on Twitter, you probably know that about, at the end of November, I suddenly flew home. I was with my family for about a week as we were mourning, and that is what November was about. It was very sudden, and so my November was a very different November than I thought it was going to be at the beginning of the month. And that's also why this video is happening midway through December. There's just a lot happening. So, let's talk about December. I know there isn't a ton of December left, but I still want to talk about my reading plans for the end of the year, what I would like to get done before the year concludes. So in December, my reading plans are mostly to conclude books that I was already reading earlier. I set down a lot of books throughout the year that I wasn't sure if I was going to get back to, so in December I'm focusing a lot on picking those books back up again, deciding if I want to finish them or set them aside permanently, and the other plan is to read some 2019 releases that I didn't get to earlier this year. So the first book that I want to talk about is my patron chosen book for December. If you don't know, my patrons vote on a book that I read every single month. This is the 12th month that they have voted and chosen a book for me to read. We are coming up on my 1-year anniversary of getting a Patreon, which has just been an incredible difference in my year. It has let me do so much more than I would have been able to otherwise on this channel, with creating in general, so I'm really, really grateful for that. I wanted to shout out my librarian patrons who are my patrons at the highest level. Those librarian patrons are Ashley, Babette, Christine, Kim, Rebecca, and Rocks at aspiring_rocks on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you all so much for continuing to make this channel possible. I rely on Patreon so heavily, and it is just... this year has been amazing. So the book that my patrons chose for me to read in December, the 2019 release that they picked, is Middlegame by Seanan McGuire. If you would like to read this book with me, I'm going to link a group down below on Caravan. That group is a group on Discord, and it is going to be a monthly thing. It is a new group from the one if you previously joined when we were reading Wilder Girls or Sawkill Girls. I'm creating a new group with a new name, so if you want to join, no one is joined yet, please join that down in the description below. That is going to be a place where we can discuss the patron chosen book every single month. Middlegame by Seanan McGuire is a 2019 release about twins. It's also about alchemy and potential godhood. What I know about this book is very vague, but that's how I want to go into this book. I love Seanan's writing, and this has been so highly reviewed. In 2019, everyone who's read this book that I've seen has loved it. So if you would like to read this book along with me in December, you can join in the discussion. If you've already read it this year, still join in the discussion. We'll have a spoilerific discussion at the end of the month. Thank you to my patrons for choosing this book. I also wanted to shout out 2 books that I'm currently reading. Those are The Stars and the Blackness Between Them by Junauda Petrus and A Two-Spirit Journey by Ma-Nee Chacaby. This is a book that I started reading in November for both Nonfiction November and IndigAthon. Just didn't get the chance to finish it. And The Stars and the Blackness Between Them I started, I think, over the summer. Somewhere in there, maybe it was September. This is a nonfiction book about a two-spirit elder. It's about her entire life, and a lot has happened to her in her life, so even though this is a short book, it's taking me a while to get through because there's just so much life lived here. And The Stars and the Blackness Between Them is about a girl from Minneapolis and a girl from Trinidad. They met when they were younger, they cross paths again when they're older, and they start possibly falling for each other, but Mabel, the girl from Minneapolis, is also starting to suffer from an illness. She isn't sure what it is, but this is a lot heavier than I was expecting it to be. It is about illness, and I don't think I was properly prepared for what kind of illness this was going to be, so it's a little heavier. It's taking me a while to get through as well, but I am really enjoying it. I think it has one of the most original and unique voices that I've read in YA in a long time. for both Mabel and Audra, the other main character. So those are 2 books I'm currently reading. And some 2019 releases I would love to get to before the end of the year include Stargazing by Jen Wang. This is a middle grade graphic novel about 2 friends. They're 2 friends from the same Chinese American community, and it is about how it seems like one friend has always been more there for the other, and then something terrible happens, and it's about whether these 2 friends can kind of switch the script, whether Christine can be there for Moon instead of Moon always being there for Christine. I'm really excited to read this book. I also have When We Left Cuba by Chanel Cleeton. I read the first book in this, like, duology. There it is, Next Year in Havana, last year at the end of 2018, so I thought it would be fitting to finish off 2019 with the companion novel. Next Year in Havana is a dual POV book set during the Cuban Revolution and then also set during 2017, and it's following 2 different women in the same family. When We Left Cuba is about a character named Beatriz who was mentioned a lot in this book, but now she gets her own book. So I'm really excited to read more about Beatriz, her life, and what was going on with her during the revolution and what has been going on with her since. So hopefully I'll be getting to this as well. The last book that I want to mention is one that you all kind of chose for me. On Twitter, I asked for people's favorite queer release of 2019. There were a ton of answers, so many incredible books. I will go ahead and link that tweet down below so you can check out all of the replies, maybe find some books for yourself to read, but one of the most recommended books on that list was Like a Love Story by Abdi Nazemian, so I'm gonna try to read Like a Love Story. This came out, I think, in June of this year. It is a YA historical fiction book. It's set in 1989 in New York, and it is about a couple of different queer characters. It is about activism, about the AIDS epidemic, and a lot of people really loved this book this year, so I'm hoping I can get to it before the end of 2019 so I can see what all the hype is about. But that is it. Those are my reading plans for the end of December. That is what I read in November. Please let me know if you have read any of these books and your thoughts about them, whether I have read them or not. I just want to hear more from all of you. Other than that, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in another one very soon. Bye!